as I talked to medical students from around the country and reviewed a lot of applications, both for residency and for some of the programs that we have, the one thing that really struck me is that there's, a lot of sort of mysticism around the application process. And what we're hoping to do is, slowly demystify that process. And I think, one of the most important things that you'll do is write a personal statement and construct your CV. And so I thought that this would be a really helpful way to kind of structure applications and give you all a little bit more insight into what we're looking for and what programs around the country are looking for. We're really fortunate to have a great group of speakers today. Dr. Greenberg was a former program director before he came here and is the head of the MIS department. Dr. Allie Martin is one of my partners in the HPB section, and she's done a lot of work on this specific topic with SBAS and other groups. And then we have a great cohort of residents. So, first we'll kind of go through some of the general topics as to, how to construct a CV, write a personal statements, and then there will be breakout sessions where you can ask kind of more individualized questions. I'm happy to take any questions right now, but if there are none, I'm going to actually hop off the call so that people can feel free to ask whatever questions they want without me hovering in the background. This really is supposed to be as informative as possible, and so there are no bad questions. I still remember when I was a fourth year, I had no idea what I was doing, and so there's no way that your questions are worse than mine were at that point. So please feel free to ask whatever questions you want. And I'll turn it over to Nemeka again.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. And then tonight, we will start with CVs and then move over to a personal statement. As for CV, we will have Dr. Martin, who will be leading that. I will turn it over. I'll stop sharing my screen so she can start sharing. And then she will introduce herself at that time as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nemeka, and everybody else. It's really a pleasure. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. So I guess I should preface this by making sure that everybody knows that I am in no shape or form an authority on this topic. I'm just an interested third party. All jokes aside, I do find it to be a topic that often draws my attention. Looking at people, I review things for people all the time. I'll have residents send me their personal statements and CVs because they're applying for some type of scholarship to go to a meeting. It just comes up constantly. So the more that you're thinking about your CV, the more refined it can become. And there are some differences and transitions. And whenever I go back to this topic, I always look up the CV that I made in high school, and it's literally the cutest thing I've ever seen. It is also completely inappropriate for this stage in my career. So it's nice to see where we start and where we go. That resume wasn't wrong at the time. It's just not right for my current position. So like Dr. Shah said, I'm an HPB surgeon. I'm surgical oncologist at Duke. I have had some professional society associations that have allowed me to do some professional development with medical students and residents in the past. And my disclaimer is that a lot of this is my personal opinion. And my second disclaimer is that I got these slides from Vic Lawbuck at UVA, where I was a resident, and I have to give him all my kudos and gratitude for giving permission to use a version of his slides that I edited. But he's an authority on this topic, many times over, NIH funded, knows exactly what a professional or academic CV should look like. And I really do appreciate him for letting me use it. He gave us this talk when I was a lab resident, and I still remember it like 7 years later. So if that tells you anything about how nerdy I am, it might also make you listen to me. So what is a CV? Latin for the course of life, which you might think is pretty appropriate if you look at some of our visiting professors' CV that gets sent around as they can be extremely long. They are comprehensive. That is how it is different from a resume. A resume is short form, often one page, and a CV has no limit to its length. This is the CV that often gets sent to me. We review applications all the time for visiting students, and they often look like this. These are really pretty. Don't be embarrassed if this is what your CV currently looks like, but we're looking to get you to something that looks more like this. Oh, it's so sad. It's not scented or pink like Elle Woods would do, but it is appropriate and is more likely to get you the position that you're looking for. So this is what we're headed towards after this talk today. So the purpose of your CV is to describe your entire academic career and career trajectory. Where have I been? What have I done? What successes have I had? And then how do I use all of this to convince you that I can go where I say I want to go? That's that trajectory part. And it's really important that you keep that in mind as you're constructing your CV. It is comprehensive, and it is a list of your professional accomplishments and qualifications, but what it is not is a demonstration of your creativity or aesthetic or free spirit. As I mentioned on the prior slide with those examples, it does not have a photo. It should not be cute in any way. It really should just be nicely organized, which doesn't mean it's not pleasing to the eye. It just means it doesn't need to stand out from anyone else's in any way. Clarity and completeness is what you're going for with your CV, and you'll see that theme repeated throughout this talk. So the goal of a resume is to develop your professional identity so that you can sort of let people know what type of position you're going for. You know, a lot of resumes start with, my name is whatever, I'm seeking a position as of this. Your CV is a little bit different. This is looking to organize your accomplishments into a scholarly identity. So it describes your research, your publications, funding, which many medical students have, teaching that you do. You don't have to be a full professor of medicine or surgery to have teaching accomplishments on your academic CV. Your CV is going to take on a lot of forms over the years, whether you're applying for, like I said, like a visiting position, or if you are applying for your residency, your CV is going to look a little bit different depending on what you're going for. So when you're first getting started, you need, and if you guys hear noise in the background, I apologize. It's Sunday evening and I have a 2-year-old or almost 2-year-old, so she's loud. So I apologize in advance. But the first step when you're starting your CV is to collect all your professional information. It's good if you have old resumes. That can be a nice starting point because they often have at least some modicum of the different things that you've done over the course of your career organized. And so you can use that as a starting point. But I recommend that you make lists of these different accomplishments. Ultimately, that is what will compose your constructed academic CV. I'm just gonna check the chat just to make sure. There we go. Thanks. I see Nemec is just reminding people of logistics. Okay. Also, I'm going to send these slides, so they will get shared with you. So don't take notes or feel like you're missing stuff because it is a lot of information. Your CV also needs to provide complete information. You need your full bibliographic citations for any publications that you have. And I know in this day and age, medical students have increasing list of publications. You can get these from PubMed. You don't have to spend time formatting. There are drop downs on PubMed that will spit this out for you, and you copy and paste, and it's accurate and perfect, and you move on with your life. Any presentation that you do should go on your CV. And then of course, just like on a resume, you need your degrees, your jobs, your awards, and any other relevant experience. The last one's probably not as relevant. Okay. This is more for faculty, but just in case you guys save this and use it, like I use Dr. Laubach's presentation, and now that I'm a professor as opposed to a resident, as I was when I first heard a talk like this, there are different types of CV formats. So there's sometimes institutional format. Duke, for example, has an institutional format that we're required to use. And then there are sometimes external formats. This might come up for you guys sooner when it comes to something like the NIH BioSketch. So if you're applying for different types of funding, even if you're a student or a resident, you may need an NIH BioSketch. You may already have one formatted. A BioSketch in the NIH format isn't exactly a CV, but it is CV-esque. So that's probably the earliest type of external CV that you might use. When it comes to CV formatting, there is not a standard format. If you saw that example slide that I showed earlier with the academic CV, there are many acceptable formats. What you want to do is just keep it simple. One font, simple margins, no kind of crazy symbols, just simple bullet points. You want it to look very uncluttered, and you want to be really selective in what you include. Don't stretch it. It's okay to have a simple CV when you're starting your career. Don't try to bloat it up with things that aren't really stuff that goes on a CV. In terms of headings, just use bolding or capitalization. I prefer all caps headings for my CV as opposed to bolding. I just don't like the way bolding looks. I want it to look sort of like clean and washed out. But everybody has a different sort of aesthetic they're going for, and that's just my personal one. So just pick one that works for you and go with it. Think about your headings in terms of spacing on the page, and I'll show a couple of examples later. You don't want any orphan headings, for example, at the bottom of a page. If you've got a heading that's at the bottom of a page and you don't have enough information to get it to the next page, just space down or enter down or control return until you get to a new page so that you don't have headings floating at the bottom of the page. And before I forget to say it, the first word on the first page should be your name. Do not have CV or curriculum vitae written at the top. You don't need that. Everybody knows that's what it is. It's obvious. In terms of formatting, just to keep going here, we talked about using a consistent font, but use consistent style, and headings and formats. Do not change it up as you go through your CV. This is the most boring document you'll ever produce in your life. The other special thing about the CV is you want to make sure it's reverse chronological. So all your newest, most up-to-date papers and accomplishments and jobs should come first. So it's reverse chronological order. Your font should be something simple. I can't really deal with Times New Roman anymore personally. I often use Calibri or Arial, but you do you. Times New Roman is a very acceptable traditional font, but I don't really love it. So you can control highlight and change the font and see what looks good to you, but just don't make it a distracting type of font. It should not be pretty. If you look at your CV and you're like, oh, so pretty, so cute, you should change it. It's not supposed to look that way. So bold your name in your publications, your abstracts, and your grants if you have them. So, even if you're the third author on a publication, you don't want them to have to go searching for why is this on this person's CV. Just bold your little short last name, first initials, so they immediately, their eye is drawn to that and they know this is, Dr. Eze's, first author publication. Don't make them look for it. The other really important thing that I put at the very top of my CV is the last revised date. Who is that for? That's for you. That's so that when you open up that CV document, which is a living document, I'll talk a little bit about updating the CV later in the talk. When you go back and open up that CV document, you know when is the last time I opened this up and dropped on that most recent accomplishment, publication, new job. Lab position, whatever it is. So keep that for you, but it also is for other people. When you send it out, they know that this is a person who has updated this information, who is on top of things and organized. And I'll get to this a little bit later, but I would also recommend keeping different versions of your CV, because even though it's a living document, you can have one that's a living document and then several that stay in their sort of historic phase. So I have like I said, I have my high school resume, I have my college resume, and I have my med school CV, and then I have Allison Martin. It's so boring. I keep my saved titles for each of these documents all the same as well, because it'll go from Allison Martin, residency, CV, fall 2013, and that date will just change over and over. And over time, I've updated the format, I've changed some things, but ultimately, if somebody asked me, who were you as like an academician, as a PGY2 resident, I can pull that document and tell you. So I would recommend you using a similar system, because I promise you, when you're going back and applying for your boards or whatever it is, you are going to wish that all of that stuff that you had so carefully compiled 15 years ago, that pains me a little bit, is somewhere organized. And so if you do it like that starting now, you will never have an issue with this, and other people will be scrambling and you'll just be like, no problem. And the other thing that you really need to make sure that you do is do page numbers on each page. And usually I say page 1 of whatever. And that way, in case somebody that you're applying for a job, in case they actually print something out, such as in the Stone Age era, I like to print things out sometimes I don't. But if I did, I would be happy if I knew that I had every page of a person's CV document. So that's also so folks can keep themselves organized. Probably not as important in the digital age, but some people might be printing things out. So I would default to the most conservative person who might be reviewing your application or your CV. All that wordy descriptive text that existed on many of my old CV versions, certainly on my resumes, all of that goes away. You want to keep things really nice and simple, and I'll give an example later. In terms of the length, there are occasions where people will ask you for an abridged CV. When they do that, they almost always give you specifications. We want your top 5 publications that you want to highlight. Your most recent job, only these XYZ categories. If they don't give you specifications for an abridged CV, there are many examples online for what an abridged CV would look like. Otherwise, your full-length CV is your default, and that's what most people are wanting. References, unlike a resume, do not go on a CV unless somebody is specifically requesting them. For most of your professional career going forward, references will be requested separately. So this is sort of a standard. This is not my CV template, but it's one that's really nice and generic looking. I think it's actually probably the UVA internal institutional CV format. It's really nice and clean. Something like this is a really good starting point. It does say curriculum vitae at the top. Not sure why it says that when I really don't think it should. And I think most people would agree that it really doesn't need to say that. So delete that part. But otherwise, this is a nice example of how you might want to organize yourself. This is probably more likely intended for a faculty having the research, teaching, and clinical activities. So I'm going to steer you guys at the end of the talk towards some resources that might be more appropriate for student level. But even if you decided to use a version of this, I think you'd be in a really good position, because in some way you're going to figure out how to fit your different things into these different categories and then delete the ones that just don't apply to you. And that's fine. Like I said, there's no specific format that you must follow. And that just continues here. Okay, so then just sort of a series of quick slides that go through some different tips for how to put your best foot forward on your CV. Your CV is supposed to reflect all of your productivity, research-wise, publication-wise, when you present at your first or many national meetings now that students are presenting at, any efforts, experiences, or qualifications that are going to make people understand why you are going where you are proposing to go with your career. You're supposed to be proud of your accomplishments. It's not the time. I get very shy about this kind of stuff. It's hard to go on interviews and talk about all your accomplishments, but it's like practicing anything else. You just have to get used to it. It's a little less embarrassing doing it on your CV because it's on paper. You're not saying it out loud. You're literally just writing it down. It's just facts and it's out there and it's fine. So you don't want to be embarrassed about putting this stuff out there. You just need to put it out there so people can know what they're getting. And it's you, the very qualified applicant who's applying for their position or whatnot. Definitely get examples of other people's CVs. I have never ever asked a person who I admired or respect professionally for a version of some document with intent, like I need this because I am doing X, and had them say no. That has literally never happened to me. And so if there is a person that you work with that is a mentor of yours, feel free to ask them to look at their CV and then ask them to look at your CV. The other thing you can do, which is something that I did when I was in grad school, I got my master's in the middle of medical school, and where I was getting that degree, they had a really, and I'm not speaking totally Duke specific because I know not everybody is from Duke. Many schools of medicine, schools of public health, just even the undergraduate campuses have professional review for CV. You don't have to do this on your own. You can also structure your CV and get feedback and edit it. They might have templates, and I'll give you some examples of those types of things at the end of this, but wherever you are, ask your folks in the, ask your dean of students. Those people will all know this stuff and they're not hiding it from you. They just, maybe they told you in the very beginning of onboarding for med school and you forgot, or maybe they didn't even remember to share that type of thing because they just thought, oh, these guys are so smart, they already know it. But we are smart, but some of these sort of, these little hidden agenda things, we don't always get, taught. So it is nice to use those resources and get feedback. And most of the time, you don't have to pay for that. In fact, you really shouldn't have to pay for any of that. In terms of comprehensive nature of the CV, you really should be documenting everything you do. If you get a certificate of completion for some type of training that you do, just save all that. Just have a folder that's like your CV folder or your accomplishments folder, whatever you want to call it, whatever will help you remember it. I have a desktop folder that I keep all this stuff in, and that way I can't ever lose it in some random, I've switched laptops and desktops 1,000 times now since I started medical school. And so I've got multiple versions of multiple hard drives that are like hidden. But if I keep that desktop document and folder, I don't lose any of this stuff. So that's kind of what I do. So anytime you get any of this stuff, just put it in that folder. And then I'll talk a little bit more about updating on a future slide. In terms of writing descriptions of things. So if you've got a description of a research program that you completed, you want to use really strong action words at the beginning of very short statements. You don't want it to be long. So you created, you mentored, you represented, you trained. These very strong words, and you do not want to repeat these words often. So you want to, it's just like when you're writing a paper, you don't want to constantly say the same word over and over again. You want to use different words. It needs to be an appropriate word. So if there's no other alternative, then just use the same word. But try if you can to use alternative words. Avoid using I. It's just really not the way CVs are formatted. They're much more passive documents. And then the most important thing, other than having it be aesthetically pleasing, yet not pretty, it has to be perfect, no errors. So once you construct your CV and you review it again, send it to a friend, send it to your mom. My mom was a reading teacher. She's reviewed everything for me. She finds misplaced commas and periods and extra S's, and it just has to be perfect because that's your first and likely only opportunity to impress somebody is your CV. So it just really needs to be perfection on a plate. That's who you are. In terms of bullets, they're not really used as much on CVs, but if you decide that you like that format, once again, it's up to you. Keep it limited and keep it relevant. Keep the most important things at the top of your bulleted list. This should be obvious, but don't lie, falsify, exaggerate. And yes, be able to provide evidence. I think it's really uncommon. Honestly, once again, digital age, most of the things that we've all done can be Googled. So it's unlikely that somebody would actually come to you and ask you to prove that you did something on your CV. But once again, save all those certificates and whatever and completions and emails, just save all of it. There's really no reason not to do it. It's the easiest way to just keep yourself out of trouble. But once again, should be pretty obvious not to lie. Don't repeat yourself. Don't pad your CV. High school stuff is gone unless it was like, I mean, I don't know. You would have had to maybe, I think even if you won the National Spelling Bee, I'm still not totally sure that goes on your professional CV. Maybe others would argue it does, but it would have to be pretty outrageous to include something that's undergraduate. And even the undergraduate stuff really starts to go away as you keep moving forward. Spell check, be perfect. Simple, readable, succinct, don't go on and on. Your resume looks good. However, I'd limit it from 8,000 pages to 5 from now on. I thought that was, corny, but funny. Okay, personal data. This is just sort of a quick note. Don't include any of this stuff. None of it goes on there. Your social security number, your hobbies, all that stuff that you would put on like my high school resume had something about soccer on it. No, nobody needs to know that I played club soccer in residency. That's of zero interest. I know if you're talking about an interview and just being a real person, that's different, but not on your CV. What you do want is citizenship, visa status, and in every possible way include all the information that allows them to get a hold of you. This says a professional looking email address. I kept that, but I also put my Gmail address on there. Unfortunately, as we all move around, sometimes you just need to use your Gmail for stuff because you're going to lose your university affiliated email addresses when you're moving around. So I just would suggest that you maybe include both. That's what I do at least. So you kind of make that decision for yourself. Some organizations have legacy emails where you get to keep it, but I've never been somewhere that does that. So I often will use both of them so they know they can contact me at the current university one. But if for some reason they have a copy of my old CV, they can always default to my Gmail address, which is stupid, but because I was a dummy when I made it. It's really awful, but it's correct and it will always get to me. So be smarter than me when creating your email addresses. I'm going to move forward just a little bit. Like I said, you guys are going to get these slides. This is basically about using incomplete sentences, like here with the action words where it says planned, graded, all this stuff, and and gives you the years that you completed said activity. But I'll keep going because I'm running a little short on time. This isn't relevant yet, but you do want to avoid any gaps. So as you do that reverse chronological ordering of activities, you don't want any gaps. And if you have gaps, you want to explain why the gaps are there. This is going to come up over and over again as you apply for, if you apply for boards and all these other things that pop up as you go through med school and residency. This is obvious, all that stuff goes on your CV. One of the questions I often get is, can you include things that are, once again, a little bit newer, things like blog posts or social media activities. If it's professional blogging, if it's professional posting or social media, yes, by all means, do a socials category and include those professional activities there. That is real. That's a real professional contribution, and thus it belongs on your CV. I mentioned the BioSketch earlier. There's a link here where you can get an example of an NIH BioSketch. I highly recommend asking your mentor for a version of their BioSketch so you can see. Also, just FYI, the NIH does from time to time, every few years, update the BioSketch format. So you want to make sure you have the most up-to-date BioSketch format if this is something you need for a grant. You may not need, this may not be relevant to most people now, but it will be relevant in the future. This is about the last slide, maintaining your CV. As I said, your CV is a living document. Every time, I think since I was an intern, every time I get a publication or get on a committee, I immediately push it over to my CV. It takes 2 seconds. That may not work for you. I'm a crazy person. It makes me anxious to not put it on there because I'm also have a mind like a sieve and I'll immediately forget if I don't do it immediately. Some people, it works for them a little bit better if they do it once a week. I would forget to do that. So for me, I just quickly pop open that desktop CV document and I put that new thing on there, double check that I've got sort of the formatting okay, and then I update the date last updated, and then I save it and I get rid of it and move on. I don't complicate it. So that's how my living document works. Yours might work a little bit different. It does require a lot of work to keep it up to date, to keep it edited and correct, to make sure the formatting doesn't get funky, like that sort of floating header that I mentioned earlier. So you have to sort of keep looking over it and making sure that it looks perfect. As I said, you can generate new versions of your CV. You shouldn't be deleting things from your master CV. It should only get longer, not shorter, unless you deem something that you've included to no longer be relevant for whatever reason. But mostly you should just keep adding. And like I said, save previous versions. You can always update, change format, but I highly recommend you not delete or just save over an old document. Just copy paste, make a new document and update the date on it there. Okay. Just a little bit of a sort of top 10 most irritating errors on a CV. These are pretty reasonable, I think. I don't think they're overly critical. Chronological order, like I said, a no-no. It needs to be skimmable. People don't have any time. Folks who are reviewing stuff have no time. So if it looks like, if it looks like it's got pictures and lots of empty space and people have tried to sort of trick you with lots of like words, people will likely just sort of toss that CV in the trash. These are a couple of examples of resources that might be helpful. I included the Duke Career Hub because I've met with multiple students since I've been on faculty at Duke who had no idea that Duke has free resources for developing your CV. I've talked to faculty who don't know that there are CV development resources, including one that will automatically spit out the internal sort of Duke format CV for you. Most of those sort of auto document producers are just a starting point. You still need to go over that generated document with a fine-tooth comb and make sure it meets all the requirements that we talked about. There's also all kinds of other resources out there through BMJ, AAMC. There's many of these are just examples. It's of course not exhaustive. And then I did come across this Quincia that Duke had under their career hub. And so if you were wondering if there is an AI for that, there is an AI software that will review and I think even produce a CV. So no endorsement from me. I'm not at all tech savvy, but if that's your thing and you wanted a starting point using AI for your CV, obviously proceed with caution. I have no idea if it's reasonable or not, but Duke put it on their website. So I thought it was reasonable to pass on to you guys in case you find it helpful. I am more than happy to share these slides. As I said, once again, my endless gratitude to Dr. Laubach, who got me thinking about this when I was a very early resident, and I only wish I had had the talk earlier, so I could have gotten organized earlier, but he is a gem, and I appreciate him for helping me pass along a lot of this knowledge to you guys. So like I said, I'll share this. Happy to share any version of my my CV, and you might hate it, which is fine. You can produce your own version. But anyway, that's it. That's what I've got.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. We'll take a few questions. I wanted to start off the questions regarding the not included military status. What about folks who are doing HPSP?
I don't know what that is.
That is the active duty military scholarship.
Very different. If it's relevant to your professional activities, then yes, that goes on your CV. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do we have any more questions?
Quick question. If we were invited, for example, to go present at a department or recently was invited to go present somewhere related to a topic that I've been working on, does that go in a separate section? Does that go under oral presentation? Where does that go?
Yeah, so I have a presentation section, and you want to do oh yeah, there we go. And you want to do you can have an invited lectures. And if it's a future date, but you're like submitting something now, it's okay to like put planned for X and put the date. If you just, I understand people want that kind of stuff on their CV, and I definitely did and do too. So yes, that just goes under invited presentations. You just want to distinguish it from like an abstract that you submitted and was accepted for presentation at a meeting, for example. But invited talks definitely are a relevant section on your CV.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Dr. Greenberg?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, so I totally agree with everything that Dr. Martin said, and that was a fantastic talk. But for most of you guys, the next step will be generating your ERAS CV. It'll be generated automatically by the application, and so it will put everything into the place where it should go. But any talks that you've given, any papers you've written, any research you've done, like it should 100% all be on there, and it will put it in the right place. But it is also really critical to generate your own CV alongside with that so that you have it going forward.
Yes, in fact, thank you so much for saying that, Dr. Greenberg. I just want to be very clear. Part of the reason that I think that NMECA and co thought this was important to include is so that people don't just default to that auto produced CV, because it is in no way going to be what you want to push forward when you're outside of the application process. You need your own CV, and please start now. I'm just like begging you, because it is so painful if you wait. You'll forget everything. It'll be disorganized. It'll take you hours and hours instead of you just starting to add now. So yes, that's perfect, but just do your own and start immediately, like tonight.
Question says, is it appropriate to add submitted, not accepted manuscripts in CV under the submitted manuscript section?
Yes, that goes for all of us. That's on my CV. Submitted under review is fine. If you haven't submitted it though, I personally don't put those on my CV, but please, other people speak up. But as long as it's under review at a journal, I consider it completely CV appropriate. If it's sitting still in my Word document, I don't put it on my CV. But Dr. Greenberg, Dr. Hill, others, please speak up if you do something different. And as long as it's clear, it probably doesn't matter. As long as it's clearly designated on your
No, I mean, I could probably still have manuscripts in preparation that I started as a medical student on my CV if I kept them all on there. So I would totally agree, only if they've been submitted or are under review.
Yeah, and then I made this comment, but in case it was lost, on my like master CV that I keep updating, I keep anything that I've submitted or is under review or EPUB ahead of print, I highlighted in orange. And that just makes it really easy for me when I'm going through my CV to remember what needs to be updated. That gets more relevant as your CV gets longer and you don't have to scroll for like what still needs to be updated. And then obviously I make it all black when I send it off.
So just to make the question a little bit harder, I've noticed with the ERAS applications, if I'm not mistaken, when you say the publication date, it only shows the month and the year. What if it's the first week of the month you're submitting the application, but maybe next 2 weeks you're going to submit this manuscript, and you list that manuscript as submitted or submitted if you're still going to submit it that same month?
Oh, I see. Like by the time the person looks at it, it will be submitted. I
Yes.
think if you feel incredibly confident about that, that's probably
I
okay.
think that's reasonable.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. If we have no more questions, I will turn it over to Dr. Greenberg, and he can start sharing his slides.
I'm sorry, I had a quick question. I wasn't sure if I should ask it here or when we do our breakout sessions, but what if you've done work in terms of like public policy? How would you go about citing that? Like if you've worked towards you know, resolutions that have been adopted by specific medical organizations or the AMA, for example, how would you go about citing it and like where would you put it? Thank you.
I would say there are sections. I'm just sort of like I'm literally pulling up my CV as we talk, so I don't like misspeak. But like there are sections where you have your like leadership and volunteer experience. And for example, if that policy work that you contributed to was part of a leadership role you held, like you were, you know, I don't know, a policy advisor to whatever senator or, you know, House of Representative member, and then it resulted, I think that might be a reasonable place for that to go, but you can be creative. And of course that should go on your CV. There's no doubt about that, particularly if it's medical or health related. But usually I would tie a professional accomplishment like that to some type of role or job.
I
And
agree
it-
with that. I just added a link to PubMed article that, well, not PubMed, academic medicine article that came out a couple years back. But basically talks about creating an advocacy portfolio for yourself. You can use that as reference, but you can just make a section in there for advocacy. And then along those lines, you can also, you know, any kind of media appearance, or if you get mentioned in, you know, even if it's a web article or, you know, you're involved in any kind of interview, any kind of advocacy, you can also list that on your CV. That's absolutely appropriate. For ERAS purposes, I'd probably list it under an experience.
And to answer George's question in the chat about sort of clinical evaluation highlights, those generally come to program directors in your dean's letter. All of those are in the dean's letter. And so you really do not need to re-mention those. Those will be part of your application that happens around you.
Agreed. Yes, those will be included in your MSPE. So we'll get all of those. And then I would not put a separate section in your CV for that.
Just before we move on, I see that Dr. Garcia Gonzalez and Dr. Camarena, I agree with what you guys both said. I think considering the level of the person developing the CV, many medical students, I think it would be reasonable to put manuscript in preparation. I think that goes away as you develop your CV, though. But I agree with you guys, and I would take your comments on that as superseding mine, because I think I've maybe moved on a little bit. But that's you're right. They should do that.
All right. I know we just got another question from Alicia, but we will start the personal statements talk by Dr. Greenberg, and we will come back at the end of his talk to take a lot more questions. All right. We have 2 hours today, so we'll get through everybody's questions. I'll turn it over to Dr. Greenberg now.
Are my slides coming through okay? Can everyone see?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Nemeka. And Dr. Martin, that was a fantastic talk. So my name is Jake Greenberg. I'm the chief of the Division of Minimally Invasive Surgery at Duke. As Nemeka mentioned, I was a program director both for an MIS fellowship and for a general surgery residency at the University of Wisconsin prior to joining the faculty at Duke. And so as a fellowship program director, I would read roughly about 80 to 100 personal statements an application cycle. And as a general surgery residency director, I read about 800 to 1,000. So while these are going to all be my own sort of biases, I definitely feel like I've had a lot of experience in the topic just from reading a ton of very, very excellent ones, some not so excellent ones, and some that left me to wanting a whole lot more from that applicant. I kind of think the personal statement is the most important aspect of your application. I may be very much alone in this. I know a lot of people get hung up on scores and grades and other things, but to me, like your scores, your grades, and even to some extent your CV are a reflection of everything that you have done, whereas your personal statement can be the reflection of who you are as a person. And to me, that was always the most fascinating thing. It's the one time in the application where you get to put pen to paper or fingers to a keyboard and talk about yourself. And not just show what you have accomplished, but talk about what drives you to accomplish it, what's shaped who you are as a human being, and more importantly, what attributes you might bring to our program that we would really find valuable. You guys are amongst a group of truly elite students, right? The overwhelming majority of people applying have excellent grades. They have excellent letters of recommendation. In fact, the letters of recommendation are really hard to go through and really kind of determine who's better than another. I had one chair who would write that the student was in the top 10% of students they've ever seen in everyone's letter. And then in one, they actually wrote they're in the top 1%. And I couldn't tell if that was just a typo or if that student was really the best. And it turns out we recruited her and I think it was the latter. But it's really hard to differentiate based on that. Whereas the personal statement is really, I think, your chance to set yourself apart in the eyes of those that are reviewing your application. So I do think it's a critical thing and really, in some ways, a hard thing to write. So I think a couple of assumptions you should make about your personal statement. So one, it's going to be read in its entirety. It should be, right? It's really, again, the one time where you put in some significant effort that's outside the classroom, and it's the effort that's dedicated strictly to this application. It should really only be one page. Like, don't drone on. Most people, and certainly I am guilty of this, I have a fairly short attention span. Anything longer than one page just starts to weigh on you. Your CV is already there, so don't waste a lot of precious space repeating aspects of it unless there are critical things that are in your CV that you really want to highlight. And in my my belief is that the more personal and honest you are, the better. Again, like, this is your opportunity to be more than just a paper application, and you should really try and tell a compelling story that drags me in and makes me want to get to know you more in the form of an interview and potentially a 5 to 7 year residency to follow. That really starts with a critical opening paragraph. And I think you should really focus that paragraph, honestly, on how are you unique. You have all had very different life-forming and life-affirming experiences. Some of those may have been great, where you've done something completely exceptional. Unfortunately, some of those may be tragic, where you lost a loved one or went through some significant hardships that shaped who you are as a human being. All of those, and certainly both of those examples, are critical to who you are as a person and will reflect what I think you are going to be like as a resident and someone that I want to train and work with. If you've had other professional endeavors that you eventually did and then you decided you didn't want to and led you to surgery, that separates you from a lot of other people that have just gone through school, and it brings with you a skill set that we may find very valuable for you in your training and beyond. So certainly try and highlight those. This is again my personal belief. I always liked to bring in people who I thought had a lot of grit and resilience and the ability to practice deliberately. And so to me, I always really look for people who had significant prior experience in like music, sports, art, dance, anything where they had to commit a significant amount of time to practicing a skill to get better at it. And then also learning how to lose and recover from that loss, because those two things I think make excellent trainees. It teaches you a skill set that helps you be a great surgical resident. If you don't have those, that's okay. You can still be a great surgical resident and certainly don't fabricate them. But if you do, it's one of the things that, at least for me, was really, really helpful to read about and drew me into that person and made me want to interview them going forward. Additionally, I think you should really talk about what attributes you'll bring to a program. Like, how does the past version of you help the training program that you want to spend your future in? And so I would really focus that opening paragraph on really who you are, what makes you tick, what are your like key standout things. And I would really try and avoid like, I knew I wanted to be a surgeon the first time I walked into an operating room because I saw this and it was cool. We get it. Surgery is cool. Like there's no denying that. I think everyone really believes that. But more importantly, like, what can you bring to an operating room that someone else that's applying for that same position potentially can't? So don't necessarily go right into I wanted to be a surgeon the first time I saw something. Talk more about yourself. The body of it should be really based on, again, on your past experiences. And they can be from any time in life. Certainly, probably the most relevant portion is what you've experienced in medical school. But it can really be anything that you've done in your history that makes you, again, stand out. So what formed sort of your vision of what it means for you to be a surgeon? What makes you that valuable person that we want to bring into a training program? So, and more importantly, like, how are you a better person, or what changed you based on your life experiences that, again, you can bring into an operating room, into a group of other residents, and into a residency program to perform very well. I'm a big believer in sort of like human psychology stuff. So I always like to see people who had a growth mindset, who went through something challenging, learned from it, and then moved on and were better because of it. So if you have significant challenges which you have overcome, which many of us do, highlight those. Talk about how you learn from them, and be open to sharing some mistakes that you've made, but then also sharing what you did to make it different going forward. I think as much as you can send it around a specific example or a story, that's very helpful. It just creates a nice narrative for people to read. But again, if you don't have those, that's perfectly fine. You can still talk about yourself and the attributes and values that you would bring to a team and the asset that you would add to any program. If you have particular interests in surgery, so if you spent a significant amount of time doing research as a medical student, as if you're an MD, PhD, if you have a background in education, if you've had significant leadership roles, or as someone mentioned earlier, have done a lot of advocacy work, I would certainly highlight that. I think, again, that's something that might be unique about you, that might separate you from some of your other peers, and it might be something that program is looking for. I know a lot of people get worried about being too specific about their interests on things, but I also kind of view this as a match, right? Like, you want to put yourself out there as your true and unique self. And if some programs don't like it, honestly, that's probably not the program for you. And that's okay. I recognize that at the end of the day, everyone wants to match and get a job, but you also want to match at a place that wants you there for who you are, and not for who you're pretending to be. So I think you should feel very comfortable being personal on this, because, again, if someone is turned off by that, that's probably not the right program for you anyway. In terms of your closing, I would summarize how you're going to be an asset to a program, right? Programs it is a symbiotic relationship. We are looking to train you, and you are looking to be trained by us, and we want both parties to be the better because of it. And there is really nothing better in what we do in all of academic surgery than watching our residents grow up, achieve great things during residency, and go on to achieve greater things than we have taught them to do during their time there. Like, it is it is the absolute best thing about being in academic surgery is watching the next generation go on to do greater things because of the small part that you played as a faculty member in their career. So it is fine to include future plans. Like if you know you want to be an academic versus private practice, that's great. If you know you want to be a community or rural surgeon, that's also great, right? The world desperately needs those. And again, if you're applying to training programs that are interested in training that type of applicant, they're going to feel great about the fact that you want to do that. So if you have well-defined future plans, include them, talk about them. If you don't, that's okay. Right? You can be very malleable. Your plans can change all the time. I was applying in colorectal surgery and thankfully ditched it at the last minute while filling out my application for it as a PGY5. So your plans can be very malleable and your personal statement doesn't have to be a document of what your future life will completely look like. But if you have some real goals, I think it's totally fine to mention it. Sometimes people put in their program, I would really love to train at Duke University because of X, Y, and Z. I've always kind of viewed that as a little bit of pandering to the crowd. I know it takes a lot of effort because you're probably making like hundreds of personal statements and sending them all out to different programs with their own program name in it. But I don't think that's really particularly helpful. I always suspected that people were just changing the name for everyone, right? So I don't think you need to do that. If there is a particular program that has some particular expertise or some person that you are really aligned with, I think that's reasonable, but otherwise I would just keep it very, very general. Every program is going to read this and every program wants to think that they have a chance of getting you. So I wouldn't necessarily highlight individual programs. In terms of tips, a little bit depends on what your interests are and what types of programs you're applying to. So if you're applying to very like niche programs or specific programs, like if you have a strong interest in rural surgery, you should focus your personal statement on why you want to do rural surgery. So at Wisconsin, we had two different tracks. We had an academic track that matched 6 residents a year and a rural track that matched an additional resident. We interviewed those groups very separately because in my mind, those are very separate applicants. The rural applicants' personal statements almost all started with, I grew up on this farm. This is the small community that I grew up in. This was my life. I want to give back to that life. And that's why I want to train to be a rural surgeon. That's perfect, right? That's exactly what I was looking for to fill that one spot. But if that read for the academic one, or people applied to the rural program and said, I want to be an academic surgeon, I wouldn't even interview them for the rural program because I know that they don't want to do that. They're just looking for a residency spot. So again, be open and honest with yourself and with the people that you're planning to send this to. You should feel very comfortable being personal. Some of the most compelling ones that I read were stories about significant loss of a sibling or a parent or growing up in significant hardship and poverty. But to me, those were the most compelling because then I got to see what this applicant had done to pick themselves up by their bootstraps and do incredible things from nothing in the beginning. And so I think it is okay to share deeply personal things, but do so obviously in a professional manner. Again, that is your life. That is what has led you to here. And that is what makes you someone that I want to get to train in the future. And again, if people don't like that, I think that's okay. Like that's on them. And you probably don't want to train in that program. So I think it's very much okay to feel comfortable being uncomfortably personal, but do so in a professional manner. Get people to read this. So I would start working on it now. Use your mentors as proofreaders, use your other students and colleagues as proofreaders. You can really share this with anyone. When you ask people for letters of recommendation, I would also send them your personal statement so that they can also give you some feedback and also know what your personal statement says so they can help them write their letter. But share this with a lot of people and get some feedback about it. The most important thing about this is just start writing, right? Like just start typing, see where it goes, know that you're going to have multiple revisions and multiple changes, and that's great. But it is a hard skill to kind of, in some ways, brag about yourself in a professional way. It's not something that comes naturally to many people. I have an enormous ego, as Dr. Hill and Dr. Martin can attest, and I'm particularly bad at this. Like this is not my skill set to brag about myself, even though I really like myself. So just start writing, edit it a lot, and get some feedback. And then the most important thing is save this in perpetuity, right? You are going to have to write another personal statement in several years when you apply for fellowship. And this can be the basis of a lot of it. A lot may change, but a lot of the structure of it is going to be the same. So never get rid of this document, keep it forever. Mine, when I was applying to residency, my background was all in music. And so I wrote about how being a musician would make me a better general surgeon. And then when I applied for fellowship, I wrote about how being a musician would make me a better minimally invasive surgeon, not colorectal surgeon. So keep it forever, but honestly, just start writing. If it looks terrible from the beginning, that's fine. Edit it down, get some feedback. And again, this is your chance to really share who you are so that people want to interview you to get to know you better. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much,
Dr.
Dr.
Greenberg.
Greenberg.
Oh, sorry, Nameka.
No, go on. Go on.
We have an anonymously submitted question that I could read for you if you'd like. It says, when it comes to being personal in interest within a personal statement, how do programs receive an applicant's desire to work with a specific health population, i.e. minority or immigrant?
I think they would be very open to that, especially if they take care of a significant population of minority or immigrant patients, right? So if that applicant is applying to the right programs and seeking out programs where that is the demographic of who they care for, that's exactly who you want in that residency, right? You want someone with that sort of experience and interest, because my take would be that they'll take better care of that type of patient population and be more invested in what they're trying to do. So I would feel great about that. But again, you have to be a little bit selective then about where you're probably going to apply and make sure that it's relevant to those programs.
Thank you, Dr. Greenberg. But before we take more questions, I just wanted us to do a quick introduction of all the folks who are helping out today. We have some more faculty that are online with us. I will try to go through folks as I see them. Dr. Susie Hill is here with us. I'd like for her to introduce herself. So when you guys are asking questions, you know who you're speaking with today. Dr. Hill?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm a colorectal surgeon. I spend half my time at the main Duke Hospital and half my time at the regional hospital. I'm also one of the APDs of the general surgery program.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. We have Dr. Alberto Monreal with us as well.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alberto Monreal. I'm currently the endocrine surgery fellow for 3 more days, and then I'll be joining in September back on as faculty. And I'll also be at Maine Duke as well as Duke Raleigh. So looking forward to meeting folks in the breakout rooms. And thank you very much for letting me be here today.
Thank you, sir. And then we have some more faculty who will be joining soon, but for now, let's go through some of the residents that are here. Adrian?
Hello, everybody. My name is Adrian Camarena. I'm a PGY4, second year in the lab currently. One of the Duke surgery residents, really glad to help out with this workshop.
Sharma?
Hi guys, I'm Shama. I am one of the research residents as well, technically a PGY5. I'm starting my 3rd year in the lab, just doing some fun pancreatic cancer basic science research. So pleasure to meet you all.
And Nadar?
Can't hear you, Nader.
Thank you, Dr. Greenberg and Mecca. Sorry about that. Nader Abraham, general surgery, 1st year in the lab. Glad to see everyone. If anyone is interested in transplant, happy to talk to.
Thank you, everyone. I think that is all we have now. Some folks may join us later. But thank you so much to Dr. Greenberg and Dr. Martin, 2 great presentations. We will now take as many questions as you have before we go into the breakout rooms. Feel free to use the chat function as well.
So one other thing that I actually I didn't even think about in making that talk, but Dr. Martin brought it up for the CV. I would absolutely not use any AI technology for writing your personal statement. Like, make that personal, write that yourself. I don't know if anyone, I certainly wouldn't. I don't even know how to use AI, period, because I'm old. My kids probably do, but they haven't taught me yet. But I would absolutely write that yourself. Like, don't mess around.
And I would say the other thing about that comment is just, the AI is big data. So if you were to do that, it would swallow up your personal statement, and potentially, if somebody did like some kind of search to see if it was plagiarized, it could look plagiarized, and that would be obviously a total stop. So there's no reason to risk it at all, not even as a starting point. CV is a little different. There's no plagiarizing your CV, obviously.
I will ask a question to our faculty. As you get through multiple applications, Dr. Greenberg mentioned going through 8,000 applications. How do you get through that large number of applications when you have very little time? What is your strategy? Like, what do you focus more on as to know who do I need to dig in deeper in the application?
So I always held on to that myself as a program director. I didn't use my APDs or anyone else to do it. I would open up everyone's application, and I went by school. So I would take everyone from whatever school they were applying from. So if it was UVA, I would line up all the UVA students. I would open up all their applications right next to one another. I would read their personal statements. And then I would look at their scores, and then I would look at their letters of recommendation. So for me, the personal statement was really the big filter. And then the only thing that would knock that down were if there were like failures on USMLE or some other significant red flag in a personal statement. The dean's letters were always, to me, a little, they're harder to use. The MSPE was like a little bit harder to go through. I would certainly look to make sure that they had reasonable scores. But and again, this might just be me. The personal statement for me was always like the standout, because it was the one thing that was more than just who you are as an academic student. It's actually who you are.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really have much to add. I guess I should have said that I'm the EPD for the surgical oncology fellowship, and probably there's a reason that I'm focusing on fellowship, is that residency is just such a beast, obviously. But I also have reviewed applications and screened and interviewed when I was a fellow for our fellowship where I trained. And I think that what Dr. Greenberg said is so important. And I agree about the personal statement. It's the only thing other than the letters of recommendations that I don't skim. And I think that's why I make it so like obvious in the presentation about the CV, is that it has to be skimmable. Nobody is going to read your CV from front to back. It's just literally not going to happen. They just don't have the time. But people read your personal statement. So it really needs to be where you put your focus.
For the CV, is there any particular section in the CV that you at least look at to know something about this applicant?
I mean, I think that, oh, that's really hard. But your publications have to be completely up to date, for sure. More and more, that is your currency. Publications, it's just getting so competitive that part just really has to be like square, and nobody has time to go to PubMed for every applicant. So you have to have it on enter it into ERAS, and so then it shows up on your generated CV. And then I was gonna say maybe your leadership section. Those parts are pretty important.
I would also look at sort of like honors and awards. So if they had grants or any other award, that was always something that I would take notice of too. Again, it is different looking at someone applying to fellowship than it is for residency, right? Residency you're doing based on sort of your undergraduate and medical school, and the opportunities for awards are more limited. But for people who are AOA, for people who were Phi Beta Kappa, for people who had other grants and awards. That would be something I took notice of too.
I had a question for the personal statement. If you have something on your application that you feel could be a red flag, but you want to address that, is the personal statement a place where you can do that if you feel like you can write about it in a way that'll make you look stronger rather than weaker?
So I personally think yes, right? So I think if you had to repeat a year of medical school, or if you failed like a step and you learned from it and changed from it and got better because of it, I think that's very reasonable, right? Everyone's going to see that stuff. And so turning a blind eye to it and not acknowledging it to me was always like a little bit worse than owning it and saying, here's what I did differently. Here's how I learned from this experience. And here's how I move on going forward. Because to me, again, sorry, I don't know why my Zoom does this. If I get like the bubbles and stuff, I can usually make fireworks go off. Let's see. There we go. I think my kids messed up my Zoom setting and I don't know what they've done. So I think it's reasonable to highlight those because otherwise it's just there and you're going to see it anyway. So I think it's very reasonable to talk about those again as a sign of how you overcome a hardship.
Thank you, sir. I'm gonna stop recording so we can, people can feel a little bit more free to ask questions.